You're on 94.9. It is 16 minutes past 4 and it's Tuesday afternoon. And after 4 o'clock, we have a chat with Creation Ministries International. And today we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line. Good afternoon, Dr. Ron.
Good afternoon. How are you going?
Awesome. It's fantastic to have you back online again. Always love speaking to you. You come from a part of the world that a lot of people here. Well, I know one of our announcers, the one that was on right before me, he's about to go up your way.
Okay, well, in case the audience doesn't know, I'm on the Sunshine Coast, and you've heard of the Garden of Eden, haven't you? Well, yes. Sunshine Coast is next door.
Just next door. Yes, well, we sort of, that southeastern sort of Queensland, it's all the same place to us, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast. They're fairly close, but I know for you it's like hundreds of kilometres, but this is Australia. Dr. Ron, I was reading through, creation.com, the website that you guys have. And, of course, there's thousands of pages of info there. But I noticed a question that somebody had asked you at some time in the past that caught my attention. And mainly because I was reading about permafrost. And apparently overseas in I don't know where it is, I think it's Siberia or somewhere, there's this place called the Gateway to Hell. That's what they're calling it. It's like this giant hole in the ground. And the permafrost it's sort of the ground is melting away. As the permafrost melts, it's just forming a giant hole. And then I saw this sort of headline. It says, was there enough time for thick permafrost to form? And I thought, oh, that's interesting because, it really is thick, isn't it? How thick does that stuff get?
Oh, it can get quite deep. Parts of the world at the moment, for example, as you're saying in Siberia and those sort of places, it can get up to 1,500 metres deep. And essentially, permafrost, if those listening aren't familiar with it, it's simply soil or subsoil that's been frozen. And so that that freezing can be quite deep.
Yeah, and it's frozen so much so that I see the photo that you guys have on there is a guy digging the soil, but not with a then one of them might have a shovel. The other one's got a jackhammer that's in the soil because I assume it's so hard and cold that it's a bit like cutting through ice.
Exactly. It basically, yes. It's totally frozen, so it's like a giant ice block, only very, very deep.
Yes, and of course right on the very top there's some sort of green grass and a few trees and stuff, but it's just frozen because it's just so cold in those areas, and of course they get snow covered as well. This obviously, I say the photo was probably taken right in the middle of summer when it wasn't sort of snowed over, but regardless, this story, the gentleman that sent the question to you was talking about how, it takes a really, really long time, so someone had told him, to create the ice. Is that true?
No. I'll go back first of all to your comment on the green grass and that. Yes, it does come on green during summer. The top layout does defrost. And, of course, you then get a lovely grasslands and those sorts of things occurring on it. But the claim that it takes, 500,000, 750,000 years to reach that depth, that's what I would call an interpretation. It's not based on solid evidence. In other words, no scientist saw it doing that. No scientist measured it doing that. It's based on an interpretation. It's what they feel it probably took, based on their other ideas of dates and ages and climate change and so on. According to the model they already have, they think that this must have taken. And that's where, in that article when I was writing back to that lovely chap who wrote that, I think it was a chap, I did warn them about using, particularly places like Wikipedia that they were using.
Yep.
Because that's generalization. That's not really a good scientific work. And even then, if it does base it on scientific work, you've got to ask the question, were they there? Did they see it? Did they measure it? Or is this simply their interpretation of what they're looking
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I have always just believed that if something gets cold enough, it freezes. Simple as that. You know, the fact that they'd put 750,000 years to get to a depth of like near 700 metres, I thought, well, what's that based on? I mean, surely there's no one ever done the experiment before, so how do they even know that? How would they possibly know that particular time?
Exactly. And of course, the rate of processes, they do slow them down a lot. And that's an interpretation again. It's because it helps with the long ages that they argue all the time. But again, we weren't there. But there's little doubt it took some time to get that deep. But I doubt seriously that it took that long. In fact, it would only need a short period of time, a few hundred years, to do equivalent.
Yes.
So yeah, I was just warning the person not to follow the Wikipedia version of science and so on. At times it can be good, but other times it's not. But also, the scientists are not looking at it from a biblical perspective. They're not looking at it from a flood with a ice age, a global flood with an ice age that followed it. And that ice age would have been incredibly rapid as well. And that we have published a lot on our creation.com website, a lot of articles there on the ice age that occurred after the global flood. And we do know that came on extremely fast.
Yeah.
And only lasted a few hundred years, 500 to 700 years after the ice age. After the flood, that is. Yeah.
As far as animals and things that have been found in the ice, you have to assume that it happened really quickly, because they're not sort of decomposed, to a degree that you don't even know what they are. There's some that they look like they were alive yesterday, still in the ice.
Exactly. In fact, there are millions of them, not even just a few. Millions, and mammoths are, of course, the dominant ones that are recognised by people. Now, how you freeze that number of mammoths in wonderful condition, there is no other interpretation. If I use that word again because we were not there, but you really can't make any other interpretation other than that came on at an incredibly rapid speed.
Yeah, yeah, and as far as
otherwise
timing,
they would have migrated.
Sorry?
Otherwise, they would have migrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had it been slow change in climate, they would have simply been, very sensitive to their environments. So like many species, they would have just migrated.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the fact, and yeah, they had long hair, so they like the cold anyway. But then here we find them all frozen to death. It's like, okay, that got real cold real quick. And as far as the Great Freeze is concerned, when did that happen?
Well, the freeze would have occurred after the Noah's flood. Now, using the chronology, genealogy of the Bible, we place the flood at about 4,500 years ago. And if you then, what would have happened then is that once the land emerged and the sea floor was lowered, as the Lord said in one of the Psalms, what you've got then is an incredible change in the, let's say, the atmosphere and the oceans and so on, temperature changes, all those sorts of things would have been incredibly rapid. And so we believe that the post-flood ice age began almost immediately after the flood had settled down, after it had flown off the land and the land had emerged. It began almost immediately and plunged the northern parts and some of the southern parts of the planet into an ice age, plunged into an ice age for about 600 years, maybe 700 years by the time it was all finished. And so we saw a rapid drop in sea level over that period of at least 80 metres, if not more, 100, 120 metres around the world, which then allows a lot of migration of animals to occur from continent to continent. But yes, it would have occurred quite rapidly afterwards. And we've got some very experienced hydrometeorological people who've written articles for us and we've published them on our creation.com website, highlighting the massive change you would have seen in the temperature and other things as well. So it was quite expected that we would see an ice age after a global flood.
Yeah, okay. Look,
virtually immediate.
It is 4:26. We're going to go into a song right now, but we'll be back with Dr. Ron very shortly. So if you have any questions, please send them through to us. Text 0401 949 949. That was Brennan Murphy. Talk about it. You're on 94.9. It is just turned 22 minutes to 5. And, of course, we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line with Creation Ministries International, and he's happy to answer your questions. If you have any, just send them through to our text line, 0401 949 949. Now, we've been talking a little bit about permafrost, and, of course, what is there? About 20% of the world is covered in permafrost?
It was a significant amount. It's often overrated by people. Many people perceive it was much larger.
Yep.
And the ice age covered the world. No, it didn't. It's only about 20%, as you say, and mainly in northern hemisphere, in Alaska and Greenland, and Tibet, those sort of places.
Yep.
Minimal in the southern hemisphere. We're much more of an ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I was a snow reporter for a number of years, and I know that when you look at snow guns, people are often amazed when you tell them that you can actually make snow here in Australia at plus 6 degrees. They go, how does that work? Well, of course, to make snow, you need a couple of things. You need a nucleus, so they use a particular type of dust to create a nucleus for the ice crystal to grow around. And plus 6 degrees, it means there's water, which is not frozen, going through the pipes. It then hits the nucleating nozzle, which attaches this little piece of dust so as it can nucleate around it. And then they have a lot of air being blasted out of these guns to cause evaporation. So a lot of water never actually makes it onto the ground because it evaporates. But evaporation causes cooling, and so you get this mass cooling of the remaining little, blob of water, which becomes ice. And, of course, that makes fake snow. So you can make fake snow up to plus 6 degrees, but, of course, that little piece of ice has just been frozen below that temperature. So when the Earth was, it just had this giant flood all over it, which covered all the mountains and all the seas. And, of course, at that time there was a lot of upheaval happening under the ocean. I can imagine there was probably heat in the land, and there was probably volcanoes blasting a bit of hot stuff up, and there would have been a lot of evaporation happening around the planet, which potentially could have helped cool the ends of the Earth. Is that a fair sort of, maybe?
Oh no, that's a very good. Again, we're not there, so I always call it interpretation, but I think it's a very good interpretation, because we do know that all the fountains of the Great Deep burst forth, and the underground water then was superheated. So we've got the original water pouring in is actually warming part of the Arctic Ocean, whereas you've got the land cooling. Now, at the same time, you're absolutely correct. It was a period of volcanic activity. And so you've got an incredible amount of volcanic activity with, therefore, basically an atmosphere riddled with small particles of dust and covering the planet in particular. So the essentially the Arctic Ocean would have been, warm, basically, and ice-free with strong evaporation, but at the same time generating high rates of precipitation, but especially snowstorms, and would have, been particularly covering the land at that time as a result of that. So yes, your two factors there of evaporation, which pertains to the actual water temperatures on the planet at the time, straight after the flood, along with volcanic activity, those two would have led to an instant, basically an ice age. Yeah.
Now, of course, that original question that that gentleman asked, in regards to, you need hundreds of thousands of years for it to freeze, he's taking those numbers from someone who's written on Wikipedia, who obviously doesn't believe in creation, so they wouldn't believe in the flood. And if they don't believe in the flood, all of those things in their mind didn't happen. And if those things didn't happen, maybe then it would take a long time to freeze because, of course...
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, is that fair?
I agree with you entirely. That is absolutely fair because what people are doing, and I did this as a scientist for many, many years, is that you look at the rates that are going on now, you measure the rates of change that you see now, and you send them back in time. Yeah. And you assume that those processes today were the same processes in the past. And hence you get long ages, and hence you get long delays and long periods of change, all those sorts of things. The element of that scientific paradigm that the process today explain in the past, what they effectively do is remove any form of extreme event. So the prospect of a global flood is not even part of their paradigm. It's not even going to be thought about. The consequence then of an incredibly rapid ice age, both in its development and its collapse, again does not kick in. Because again, you're using that concept, which you often hear about in the media, or particularly in universities, as uniformitarianism, that the processes in the past are the same as those today. But you only have to read the Bible to realise that's not the case. Yeah. We have seen enormous changes in short periods of time associated with the biblical history compared to our belief system, if you put it that way, in science, its paradigm.
The Bible talks about how there's this giant upheaval. Now, of course, we know that a lot of people sort of think when the flood went down, it was all gone in 40 days. There was no more water. There was just like everything that we see today. Well, of course, that didn't happen. It took a long, long time for the oceans to subside sort of down to the levels they're at now. Do you know roughly how long it's taken for that to happen?
Yes, from the moment the flood, the moment the waters began running off the land, as the Lord said, I will raise the land with my hand. It's in one of the Psalms there. Once that began to happen, the ice age kicked in basically straight away because you've got all the volcanic eruptions, and then again what you're referring to there is the evapotranspiration rates and the temperature changes are all quite rapid. So essentially then it's a process then of stabilising all of that when you look at the lessening of the volcanic activity, the clearing of the atmosphere, and then the temperatures resettling back in again, which, you're looking at your global circulation patterns and so on. So our best hydrometeorologists and global climatic people in that sense have come up with a period of about, it would have been peaking ice age at about 500 years after the flood, so about the year 4000.
Yep.
It's 4,500 years ago, so about 4,000 years ago would have been the peak, and then a very, very rapid return to normal in about another 200 years. Okay. So essentially, we're looking at a period of about 700 years after the flood, once the flood had ceased, where we would have experienced that ice age.
So there was plenty of time for the things like the mammoths to breed. Of course, they were long-haired, so they were breeding into a colder sort of time period and location. It's, again, not something that happened instantly.
It came on too fast for the creatures like the mammoths. But the sea level began dropping even once it had stabilised after the flood. It began dropping almost immediately. Yeah. And so in other words, the temperature changes did come on pretty fast, and particularly in those extreme areas like Siberia and Alaska and so on. It came on extremely fast there. Otherwise, as you say, they would have migrated, and they could have migrated almost anywhere, like most species could, because even Australia was then connected to Asia. The worst you would have come across was some narrow, swampy crossings between the islands, something like that. And so it's rather fascinating that that ice age also operated as a opportunity for both animal species and humans to then migrate all around the world without difficulty at all.
Yeah, wow. Were there lots of other animals found in the ice as well?
There are others, yes, but it was very much a cooler environment to start with, and they were essentially mammoths and that. There are others there, but one of the fascinating things with research is the researchers always focus on the thing that interests them the most.
Yeah.
And that would have been the mammals. And really, it's sort of, you almost sort of feel a bit sorry for all those other species that might have been there and were ignored because they weren't spectacular. They weren't special. And it's no different to the dinosaur searching. When the original teams were searching for dinosaurs, they discarded birds and mammals because they wanted to find the dinosaurs. And only now are they looking through the trash piles of these fossil sites are we actually finding all that was discarded, which were other mammals. They were mammals and birds. So this argument that it was like the dinosaurs were the only ones around, or the argument that the mammals were the only ones around up there, I think it's a very weak argument.
Yeah.
It's simply what are we focusing on? What are we excited about?
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So, of course, it could have taken a lot longer to freeze that land, and sounds like it thawed out. Well, it's been thawing out, I guess, ever since. We're still seeing thaw now, but most of the thaw happened fairly quickly.
It would have happened fairly quickly at about 4,000 years ago. Mind you, the permafrost is still all around the world. Having lived in Finland myself, you'll come across areas of it right up in the northern part of Finland. And it'll oscillate between the surface and below the surface according to the season as well. One thing I'm sure that you would have found with the mammoths was mosquitoes. I can tell you, they're in massive quantities when you go into permafrost areas. No amount of spraying is going to help you.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, look, we've come to the end of another week. And, wow, Dr. Ron, always exciting, always interesting, and really enjoy speaking to you again this week. So thank you so much for the time. And, of course,
my pleasure.
Everybody, if you do have any questions, please just go to creation.com. It's an awesome website. There's so much on there. There's literally thousands of pages and a lot of stories that Dr. Ron has helped or has even written the whole thing. And look, we just love speaking with you and look forward to the next time, Dr. Ron.
Thank you indeed.
You are on
Always my pleasure. Always my pleasure.
Awesome. You're on 94.9.